Well, please take your Bible and turn with me to Kohelet, chapter 2, otherwise known as Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes, Kohelet. That is the name of the book in Hebrew. It is also the name of the author, or at least the title that he has chosen to assign to himself. It means preacher. It means instructor, professor, someone who gathers a crowd and has something important to say. So he is Kohelet. So we will refer to him as such off and on this morning. Some of you have expressed to me that we are marching through this book way too fast. And I certainly share that sentiment. I feel that. I really do. And whenever I said earlier that we have a lot of ground to cover, that wasn't code for cancel your lunch plans. I'm going to do my best to clip along today and to try and cover as much ground as I can, because I do realize that, yes, we are moving along at a rapid pace. However, that is by design. You see, I don't want to drown you in every detail of this book. I mean, I do. Maybe I just lied in the pulpit. I would love to do that, but I realize that that's not the best thing for us. We probably shouldn't spend too much time down in the weeds, because it is possible to lose sight of the forest for the trees, especially in wisdom literature. Wisdom literature in the Old Testament is different than a New Testament epistle or so many other passages that we find throughout the Bible, so many genres of Scripture. And here, Kohelet is building a case. He is stacking one piece of information on top of another in order to help bring us to a conclusion. He's trying to get us from point A to point B so that we will agree with him, so we'll come to the right conclusion about life. You might think of this first leg of the journey as an airplane ride. We all start out on the runway, and that's where he begins, stationary, with his feet firmly planted in the ground, and he stands on this foundational statement. He says, "Havel of Havels," says the preacher. Havel of Havels, all is Havel. It's that word vanity, which, as we have discussed previously, is not the best translation of the word. That word, Havel, it means breath. It means vapor, mist. It is something that is transient. It's not so much the quality of the thing. That's why translations such as futile or meaningless or vanity are not the best translations. I mean, yes, there is an air of vapidness. There is an air of emptiness that comes along with mist and vapor. But that's not the point. The point is that life is a breath. It is temporary. It is here today and it is gone tomorrow. It has a definite beginning and a definite ending. And that is maddening. And yet, there isn't a better word to describe life, is there, than that of a breath. It is Havel. Havel of Havels. Everything is Havel. And so that's where we start out, on the runway. We haven't left the runway yet. But then he launches into this question: what does a man have to gain from all of his toil under the sun? What does he have to show for himself? At the end of the day, what are we working for? What are we working towards? Surely there's some profit to be gained from all of this. And that's when he starts to make his ascent with this introductory poem about the monotony of life. How everything is rinse and repeat. Everything is the same old, and how we just keep going through these same cycles time after time after time after time after time, until eventually the plane finds itself high into the air in this nightmarish state at 20,000 feet, where we see this quest begin for Kohelet. He decides he's going to find some meaning in all of this. He's going to find some true lasting satisfaction. He's going to find the source of real happiness in this Havel of a life, this breath of a life. And so he turns himself towards wisdom. But as he examines wisdom, he discovers that wisdom is not enough. Wisdom has its limits. It too is Havel, in that it can't answer the big questions of life. It cannot take the things that are crooked, the crooked things in life, and straighten them out. And he can't put all the pieces together to form a picture and solve this puzzle, because there are pieces missing in the box. So he turns from wisdom to pleasure. And he goes on this semi-hedonistic journey It almost sounds Epicurean, but it's not, because he keeps his wisdom with him and his senses about him, and so he experiments with life, trying to find something solid in pleasure. Is there fulfillment, satisfaction? Is there something of worth to be found within the pleasures of life? And so he turns to preoccupation and painkillers and productivity and possessions and power, until finally, after all of that, we've been flying in the air for such a long time, he is now ready to begin his descent and land the plane today at the end of chapter 2. Perhaps an even better image than that of a plane taking off into the air is to think of ourselves as sinking down lower, deeper into the depths. Because this hasn't been a happy portion of Scripture so far, has it? I've had a couple of you come up to me and say, Hans, I thought you said that this was the Philippians of the Old Testament. In fact, I read one commentator this week who said that he truly believes in his heart that Ecclesiastes is the most joyful book of the Old Testament. And I tend to agree with him. So what gives? Why has it been so sad so far? I don't understand. How can those things be true at the same time? We're going to get to that today. But first, we have to go down a little deeper. We have to get down into the Mariana Trench of Havel. And that's where he's going to take us today, before finally rocketing back up to the surface, where we will gasp for air and hopefully find the purpose in all of this. After all, Solomon has been poking holes in our worldview. He has been dragging us down deeper and deeper. And he has been wanting to hurt us in order to help us, because he wants us to recognize that at the end of the day, we are not so special. Not as much as we think we are. I've said it before, I'm a child of the 80s. I can't help but think that I am special. The self-esteem movement was in full force. Nancy Reagan was there telling us to just say no to drugs, and all my teachers believed in me. And I believed them. That's when they first started handing out participation ribbons at sports. I was so proud of myself. I probably have a box full of those things at home, followed by a few third-place ribbons and such. Fact of the matter, though, is we are not that special. We aren't. Not as much as we think we are. And everything that we do, everything that we achieve, everything that we gain for ourselves will eventually end in Havel. All of it. It will come, it will go, it will not last. Eventually, that shoebox of mine will get thrown out and forgotten. So what's the point? What's the point? We have to remember, though, that the conclusion that Kohelet has for us, it will not help us unless we follow him on this journey, unless we follow his logic, and we start to even agree with him. I hope that you've been in agreement with him so far. I hope that there's this pain somewhere in the back of your heart as you read these words and as we discuss them together. I hope that you recognize that there is truth here. There's truth in these things. Remember, though, Solomon is not here to help us simply cope with the harsh realities of life. He's not here to help us limp along through life and to get by. No, his goal is to help us see the darkness for what it is, so we can then thrive in the face of Havel. He wants us to thrive. He wants us to flourish in a fallen world, to blossom at the bottom and grow where others groan. Since we have so much ground to cover today, and we do, we have a lot, and I'm going to do my best to get through it. I feel like I prepared 2 messages yesterday. And then I thought, Lord, no, I can't do this. We got to get out of the trench. If I leave everyone down at the bottom of the ocean today, we're sunk. So Lord, help me. Help us to get through this today and hopefully do a faithful job in expositing your word. Because of that, I'm not going to reread the text this morning. Hopefully it's still fresh in our minds from the scripture reading earlier. But I do want to give us 3 headings to help us keep our bearings as we go through this passage. We have 3 paragraphs and 3 movements of the argument. In verses 12 through 17, we see the settlement. In verses 18 through 23, we have the sadness. And in verses 24 through 26, we have the solution. So that's where we are going today. The settlement, the sadness, and the solution. And this descent back to the runway begins in verse 12. There he says, "So I turned to consider wisdom and madness and folly." So he's telling us, once again, he is going to step back and he is going to consider things from an intellectual standpoint. He is going to examine life in all of its arenas, in all of its forms. He's going to start with wisdom, and he's going to go into madness, and then he's going to go into folly, and he's going to consider all of these things from an intellectual point of view. He's going to lay back down on the floor, and he's going to stare back up at the ceiling. In a way, he's having a full circle moment here. He started out on the floor in chapter 1, verse 12. And by the time we get to the 12th verse of chapter 2, he is already done. He has finished his quest. He has finished his search. His experiment has concluded. And so now he is going to take all of that data and he's going to assess it. And he's going to figure it out for us. He's going to put the pieces in place, at least as many pieces as he has to put. Because we all know life is missing a few. Again, there in verse 12, he says, "For what can a man do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done." That's just another way of saying, I did such a good job at putting this experiment together. I was so thorough in my research, in my study, in my experiences, that no one who comes after me is going to do better. No one after me is going to come up with something new, some fresh information, some sparking insight that's going to enliven this whole thing and bring light to the situation that otherwise was in darkness. He says, no, this is it. This is the best that we have. And no one who comes afterwards is going to do better. That's his conclusion. He says they're all going to come to the same conclusion. And what is that? What is the conclusion that he comes to here? Verse 13, "Then I saw that there is more gain in wisdom than in folly, as there is more gain in light than in darkness. The wise person has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness." He says, at the end of the day, you look at wisdom and you look at foolishness. And yes, there is some profit to both. It sounds like the nuanced answer of a wise man, doesn't it? He doesn't say one good, other bad, even though one is certainly better than the other. Instead, he says there is some profit to both of them. You're going to have a good time with folly, but you're going to have an even less painful time with wisdom. Wisdom is still by far the better of the two options, and that's the conclusion he comes to, because it has the advantage. Much like how light has an advantage over darkness, and the wise man will walk in the light. Why? Because he can see where he is going. That's the advantage to flipping a light on as opposed to wandering around in the dark. I remember whenever I was a kid, I was in a lot of musical theater. There's my confession for the day. I love it. I did a lot of stage plays when I was a kid. And I still have a bunch of nicks and dings and scars all up and down my legs. Why? Because I love to hang out backstage where I didn't belong. I wasn't supposed to be back there. But here's the thing about backstages. They're dark. And you can't see a thing. And more often than not, they have props and sets and other things just littered all over the back of the stage. And I would bump into those things all the time. It's funny. You would think if you saw my legs, you'd think I played sports as a kid. Nope. I just bumped around in the dark a lot I was a theater nerd. But that's what happens when you hang out in the dark. You bump into things. You make mistakes. You dance through life. You skirt on the surface and you end up falling flat on your face. That's what the fool does. The fool gets hurt. The fool is used to pain. That's why wisdom is better. Wisdom will save you some pain, but as we've already seen, wisdom itself is painful. So you have to be careful and you have to be cautious. You even have to, pun intended, be wise when it comes to your approach to wisdom. He says, no, the wise man, he walks in the light. He sees where he is going. His eyes are in his head. But the fool walks in darkness and he stumbles around, knocking things over, beating himself up. So which is better? Wisdom. Sure, it has its limitations. And we saw that at the end of chapter 1. But that doesn't mean that wisdom is worthless. That doesn't mean that wisdom doesn't have any value. It just tells us that wisdom is not the answer. Wisdom cannot solve the big problems of life, but it can help us navigate our way through a fallen world without injury. Wisdom is very helpful, but it is only helpful here and now, for this life, for this moment. Wisdom will not help you in the future. You can't go back and change things in the past. Wisdom is for today. Wisdom is for this life. So Kohelet is not ready to give up on it. But even as he applies his wisdom to his quest for deeper answers, Kohelet can't help but realize that wisdom will only get you so far. Look at the middle of verse 14. And yet, even though wisdom is the better option, and yet I perceived that the same event happens to all of them. And here is the real problem. Here is the definitive expression of Havel in its truest and purest form, and that's death. Death. So wisdom is better, but don't rely on it too much, because the wise man and the fool have something very important in common, and that they all go to the same place. They all die. They eventually end up in the same destination. They end up in the ground, in the grave, or in an urn on a mantle somewhere. All the wisdom in the world cannot change death. You can walk in the light and not walk in the darkness. You can make wise choices, wise investments. You can navigate this life wisely, and you can avoid so much pain and heartache that comes from being a fool. But at the end of the day, the guy with the most toys and the best investments is still going to die alongside the person who squandered it all and lost everything. Verse 15, he says, "Then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me also." Again, this is the wisest man who ever lived. "Why then have I been so very wise? And I said in my heart that this also is Havel." That's a fair question, isn't it? I mean, that's fair. If it all ends in death, then why try so hard? If everything is going to level out in the end, why should I keep trying? And the answer to that question is it's a big sigh. It's Havel. It's a breath. Notice he asked the question in his heart, and he answers the question in his heart. This isn't an inconvenient thought. No, this is deeply troubling for him. This shakes him to the very core of who he is. The wisest man who ever lived is forced to question his own wisdom. He is forced to question the truth, the validity, the value of his own wisdom when faced with death. Because he realizes that wisdom is only helpful in the moment. Why? Because it's temporary. It is Havel. It is a breath. And it will not help a man after he's gone. Worse than that. Not only will it not help a man after he's dead and buried, it is not even powerful enough to secure a man's legacy. Look at verse 16. He says, for of the wise as of the fool, there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come all will have been long forgotten, how the wise dies just like the fool. In other words, death comes for us all. And time has a way of healing things, but it also has a strong way of forgetting things. We looked at this a couple weeks ago. Our great-great-great-grandkids are not going to remember our names. It's not going to happen. I can't remember, well, actually I can. Let's say our great-great-great-great-grandparents. It's hard to remember their names, isn't it? Unless you're a history buff. Unless you pay $15 a month for one of those websites that can help you out. I mean, there really isn't much there for us to hold on to, for us to remember. Why? Because our memories only go back so far. Time has a way of covering things over. Our names won't be remembered. Our work that we did this week will not be remembered. Our hopes and our dreams, our achievements, our legacies will all be buried under the sands of time. And after a while, we too, as people, as human beings, will be forgotten. The wise and the foolish alike. It will be really interesting to see how things shake down moving forward, because we live in a really weird time in life, don't we? Or a weird time in human history. This is a strange and almost science fiction world that we live in. It's kind of cool. It's very unique, but it's also terrifying, because all it does is stir up all of these ancient things that reside in the hearts of men. In fact, most science fiction hinges upon that. That's one of the things that drew me to science fiction as a kid in the first place. It wasn't so much the Flash Gordon-y sort of flashy ships and the cool technological designs that men could come up with as they dream about the future. Instead, it's this idea of putting a human being, a man, in a totally different environment and seeing how he reacts, and seeing those same ancient compositions of man come out. That's the true thrill and joy of science fiction, and that's the world we live in. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens with better technology and better information and all of that. What's it going to be like with everyone putting their lives online and digitizing every memory that we have? I mean, we might be tempted to think that that will eventually lead to permanence. That will lead to something longer lasting, so long as it's digitized, because everything is digitized nowadays. We might be tempted to think that better archives, better technology, better information will somehow fix the problem and preserve our memories for the future, that they will remember us hundreds of years from now. At least they'll have our pictures online in a cute little memorial over our ancient profile picture. But here's the question regarding that. What happens when they run out of cloud space on a future server? Or whatever technology that we happen to have in the future? Or the world is overloaded with the memories of millions of nobodies like you and me? You know exactly what's going to happen. One life will be deleted in order to make room for another. Friends, this is a hard reality of life that we cannot break, we cannot get away from. And this is something that we have to accept, as hard as it is. The fact that we will be forgotten. Our memories will not last forever, not here on this earth. It is a hard pill to swallow. The reality of death and the havel of life are hateful truths, because they destroy our self-important worldviews, our self-centeredness, that pride that we were all born with. It chips away at that. You see, death is not the great equalizer. Death is the great destroyer. It takes everything away from you. All of it. Not just your life, but also your legacy. And if you think about that for longer than a few minutes, you are going to come to the same place Kohelet does in verse 17. He says, "So I hated life." So I hated life. That's a very strong, emphatic word in Hebrew. He says, I hated life because what is done under the sun was grievous to me, for all is havel and a striving after wind. Benjamin Shaw writes, "This is the cry of a child who has just discovered that life is not fair. It is a true cry that adults have learned to stifle. That is why Kohelet's blunt statement here makes us so uncomfortable. Death and the temporary and frail character of life are evil." He adds, "It is the man who recognizes this who is truly wise. The fool disregards this painful truth at his own expense." You see, this is what happens when you pause long enough to really think about life. It's a lot like that kid's game Jenga. Did anyone ever play that? I used to love that game when I would find a friend who would play it with me. But yeah, it's that game where you would put all these blocks together in the form of a tower, and then you would one by one pull out the blocks, hoping that that tower doesn't collapse. But here's the thing. Eventually, it doesn't matter how good you are or how long you play. Eventually, at some point, that tower is going to fall. It is inevitable. Listen, death is exactly like that. It is inevitable. It will come crashing down. It is Havel. It is the ultimate Havel. It is the ultimate crooked thing that cannot be straightened. And there is nothing that you can do in your life to stop death. That's the settlement. And I hope it really depresses you. I hope it does. I hope it bums you out. I hope this thought of death sucks the joy right out of life. After all, let's not forget that death is the result of what? The fall. It is the result of sin, and it is the result of the fall. Let's not forget that death is the curse that God has placed upon man for his disobedience. Death is God's judgment for our sin, and it is supposed to stir up strong emotions within us. Death is the one thing that makes this beautiful life so temporary and so tragic, so that nothing lasts. We are never satisfied, and everything we work so hard for evaporates. These are the harsh realities of life, folks. And these are the things that we do everything we possibly can to ignore, to not think about. Don't we all want to put our hands over our eyes and our fingers in our ears, and don't we want to scream to the top of our lungs, no, I don't want to hear this. I don't want to think about death. I don't. But Solomon wants us to accept these truths. He's going to keep digging that hole deeper and deeper and deeper because he wants us to let go of the easy answers. He wants us to let go of those things that we hold on to numb the pain, to help us cope. We need to let go of them. He wants us to trash our bumper sticker theology, a worldview that says work hard, play hard. A penny saved is a penny earned. He who dies with the most toys wins. Good things come to those who wait. Keep on trucking, and death is natural. It's just another part of life. No, Kohelet tells us, and the Holy Spirit tells us through him in this book of the Bible, he tells us that we need to come to grips with the fact that everything is Havel and death is evil. But before we come up for air, believe it or not, we haven't reached the bottom of the trench yet. Almost. We have one last shove of the shovel, one last depressing reality check, and one last tightening of the screws. And I promise we'll run through this one quickly. We'll call this paragraph the sadness. The sadness. Look at verse 18. He says, I hated all my toil in which I toiled under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to a man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool. Yet he will be master of all for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is Havel. He says, I hate life and I hate work, because the day will come when everything I have worked so hard for is going to be handed over to someone else, and I have no control over that. And who knows what they will do with it? Who knows how they will handle everything that I have built, everything that I have worked so hard for? Verse 20, so I turned about and gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun. Because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This also is Havel and a great evil. So you work hard your whole life, you do your best, and then death ushers you out, only for someone else to come in and take your place. Rinse and repeat. And who knows? That person might be wiser than you, or that person might be an idiot. You have no idea. But not only do you not know, you have no control over any of it, over all that you have worked so hard for, even though you put so much effort into it, even though you spent a whole life building a life. When death comes, the tower falls and there's nothing left. So Kohelet says, not only is this Havel, this is also a great evil. He adds that on. This is evil. It's sick. It's wrong. It should not be this way, but it is. And nothing you do is going to change that. So Solomon, he sits down on the floor, crisscross applesauce, and he thinks to himself, he says, what do I have here? What have I done? He looks at all of his wisdom, his works, his houses, his vineyards, his gardens, his parks, his irrigation system, his assets, his good name, his kingdom. He looks at all of it, and he comes to despise his own labor. He despises it. Verse 22, he asked, what has a man from all the toil and striving of heart with which he toils beneath the sun? Once again, he wants to know, what's the point? What's the point? There has to be a point to all of this. Please tell me there's a point. Verse 23. For all his days are full of sorrow, and his work is a vexation. Even in the night, his heart does not rest. That's the sadness. He says, life is short, sorrowful, and sleepless. That's life. It's short, it's sorrowful, and it's sleepless. That's the gist of verse 23. But notice here at the end of the sadness, and before the solution, we have our first slight glimmer of hope. This is where we start to make our way back to the surface. This is where the plane, the wheels are coming down, and we're getting ready to land. What does he say? He says this also is Havel. It is a breath. Farmer points out that Kohelet's despair is also Havel, that it does not endure forever either. So yes, the good times come and they go. They are a breath, and we feel so bad because we want them to last forever. But friends, there is something beautiful and there is something great in the fact that even our sorrowful times and our pain, that doesn't last forever either. I don't know about you, but I am really glad that we are not in the middle of a global pandemic right now. That one's somewhat recent, and it shook a lot of people, so maybe we should go there. I mean, think about it. That global pandemic hit a few years ago, and how did people react? What do you think? On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being poorly, 10 being very well. I think most of us, 2, maybe, on a good day. Most of us did not handle that very well. And I think a large part of that is because we didn't have Kohelet's worldview. It's because we didn't think in terms of reality, in terms of Havel. That Havel did not last very long. And yet it shook terrible things out of our hearts, didn't it? We went maybe, 4 months without getting haircuts? We were told we couldn't sit with our family members in restaurants for 4 or 5 months, maybe, tops. We met in our homes for a few short months, and then by June, we were back together and we were doing everything we could. It wasn't that long, folks. It really wasn't. And yet you would think that so many of us survived World War III as we went through the pain of it all. Now, granted, it was traumatic. Yes, there were terrible things that happened. There were severe abuses that took place during that time. But friends, I really hope the next time that happens, and it will happen, I hope the next time it happens, we handle it better. That we don't grumble and complain, that we don't pretend or fool ourselves into thinking that this is just the way it's going to be forever. We're going to wear masks until we die. Friends, that's not what happened. What happened? It was a breath. It was Havel. It came and it went. Those good times, they come and they go, but friends, so do the bad times. And that is a huge blessing. That is a first glimmer of hope. And that also tells us that not all Havel is bad, that there is a blessing to be found in the temporary nature of everything, because the same can be applied to our sufferings. They're here and they're gone. They come and they go. And the next time something like that happens, maybe we should think to ourselves, oh, this is horrible. Lord, help me to not be a grumbler and a complainer. Lord, help me to honor you and to be Christ-like through this crisis. But Lord, thank you for the fact that I know that this is a Havel. It will come, it will go. And before you know it, you'll be right back to paying too much to go to live concerts. It's just the way it goes. We have this glimmer of hope here. It's at the end of the sadness, and it's before the solution. The bad times, they come and they go, just like the good. They're here one day and then they disappear. And I am so thankful for that. So by now, you should be thinking to yourself, as we have traversed these lands together, as Kohelet has brought us to this point, hopefully by now you're thinking, oh, the monotony of life. It's rinse and repeat. It's day in and day out. It's always the same. It's the worst. Hopefully you're thinking, oh, the limitations of wisdom, intelligence can't save us. We can't straighten out what God has bent. We can't figure out the puzzle because we're missing some of the pieces. And oh, please don't even get me started on the limitations of pleasure. A good laugh, a good drink, a good day's work, a good portfolio, and a good name will still leave you unsatisfied and wanting for more. And then, after all of that, how does it end? It ends in death. And it ends that way for all of us, the wise and the fool alike. Death does not discriminate. Havel of Havels. The preacher says, Havel of Havels. All is Havel. Are you there? Are you tracking with Solomon? More importantly, are you agreeing with him? Because this is the description of real life in the real world, in the fallen world. And if you aren't willing to accept these truths, then you are not ready to hear what Solomon has to say about it all. Because, friends, this is a process. And you can't skip steps. You can't just flip to the back of the book and read the answer. You can't go to the end. You have to actually walk this path with Solomon in order to get there. There is a process in our thinking. And we need to come to accept these really hard truths about life. If you really want to learn how to live your life to the fullest, you have to get down into the hole with Solomon. He has been digging this thing for a while. And it is dirty, it is dark, it is dank down there. But you have to get down with him, and you have to accept these things. If you're going to accept the truth, you have to. You have to empty yourself of these vain notions that are so popular that everyone around you holds on to, this faulty worldview that searches for permanence in so many temporary havel of things. You need to think wisdom and pleasure and achievement. You need to know that they are not going to make you happy. You are barking up the wrong tree if you think that those things are going to bring you fulfillment and satisfaction. Because if you do believe that, if you truly go along with everyone else and think that I'm going to find happiness and satisfaction around the next corner, friend, you will be disappointed and you will eventually hate life. You will. So what is the solution? I know, drum roll please. We've all been waiting for this, right? What's the solution? That's our final heading. And that is the Holy Spirit-inspired application section for this first leg of the journey. In verses 24 through 26, we have the solution. Starting in verse 24, he says, "There is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy, but to the sinner he has given the business of gathering and collecting only to give to the one who pleases God. This also is havel, and a striving after wind." So after all of that, this entire journey, Kohelet you would almost expect him to say, and so I learned to devote myself to spiritual things. And so I learned to pray more. I learned to spend more time in God's presence at the temple. So I learned to write more spiritual songs like my father David did. Or I learned to do this or to that. Instead, he just simply says, here's how I came to peace with Havel. And that's the answer we're looking for, isn't it? How do we come to peace with Havel? How do we come to a place of understanding and acceptance and even joy in a joyless world? That's the whole point of this book. That's the reason why Ecclesiastes is in your Bible. It is to help you come to grips with the reality of life and discover peace in the midst of the storm. Yes, the first 2 chapters have been depressing so far. But friends, that's life. That's the reality of life. And how do we take that knowledge then and move forward? How do we make the most of it now that we have come to grips with the reality of how things actually are? How do we make the most of it? He gives us the solution here in 3 parts. 3 parts. The first thing he says is to appreciate the simple things in life. He says, learn to appreciate the simple things in life. That's number 1. He says there is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink. Now, for those of you who might be a little put off by that, who might think, that's not very spiritual, Hans. That's a little bit too earthy for me. Eating and drinking, maybe we should go back to the New Testament next week. Because I'm not feeling very spiritually fed by this. I'm just hungry physically after reading that verse. Well, this phrase, there is nothing better, it literally in Hebrew says, this is good. This is good. He is saying that this is truly good. He's not saying that this is as good as it gets. He's not saying eat and drink and be merry, for tomorrow we die. That's not what he's saying here. This isn't Epicurean philosophy on steroids. No, he's saying that this is what God sees as being truly good. This is a good thing. This is what God, in his perspective, from the divine mind, as he purveys everything that he has created, this is good to God. This is a good thing. This is actually spiritual. This is deep. This is spiritually good for us. If you want to find some kind of lasting happiness in this Havel of a life, what do you need to do? You need to learn to appreciate the simple things in life, like a good meal. Listen, it is possible to become so spiritually minded as New Testament believers that we fail to see the glory of God in a good meal. That is a real danger, folks. A real danger. I know someone needs to hear this today. A good steak can be a spiritual experience. It can. And it should be, according to Kohelet. The last thing you need to think about when your taste buds are inflamed with delight and you sit down at a good meal, the very last thing you need to think about is what's going to happen to that food tomorrow. I mean, we all know what's going to happen. But we don't let that ruin the experience in the moment, do we? No, we enjoy it for what it is. We don't overthink things. Hopefully you don't. Hopefully, as that food touches your taste buds and your brain is just firing off all kinds of crazy light-colored activity, hopefully in that moment, you're able to enjoy it, to appreciate it for what it is. And the same thing goes for work, which brings us to the second part of the solution. Not only do we need to learn how to appreciate the simple things, we need to learn how to appreciate the hard things. That's number 2. We need to appreciate the hard things. He says that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. Even after all that negativity surrounding work and all of the harsh things he has to say about labor about how it doesn't produce as much as we think it does, and whatever gain we get from it is temporary and shallow and surface level, and then eventually it's all going to go to someone else. Even after everything that he says about that, he still says, you are onto something if you can learn to enjoy it. If you can learn to enjoy it. This is way better than what we looked at last week in chapter 2, verse 10. Way better, because yes, there is a satisfaction that comes from good work, from hard work, from a job well done, from accomplishing something. There is satisfaction that comes from that, but better than that is the ability to find satisfaction in the work itself. If you can find satisfaction in the job, in the work, then you are golden. You are golden, pony boy. So if your job is to dig a hole one day and then fill that hole up again the next day, you can come to a place where you can enjoy the act of digging today, regardless of what happens next, regardless of whatever work you produce, whatever comes out of it, regardless of whoever inherits your reward, or whether or not anyone even remembers what you did. If you can enjoy the work while you're working, that in and of itself is a spiritual experience. Even if you are a hamster on a wheel, or a cog in a machine, or just another tool in the hands of an evil man, just remind yourself that the work itself is good, and learn to enjoy the work that God has given to you. Learn to enjoy that work because God has given it to you, which brings us to the final, and I would say the most important part of the solution. I would argue that this is Kohelet's whole point, and if you get anything today, please get this. That if you want to enjoy this Havel of a life, you need to appreciate the gifts God gives you. Appreciate the gifts God gives you. That's number 3. We need to see that everything, doesn't matter what it is, the good, the bad, the mixtures, everything is a gift from God. Everything. In the middle of verse 24, he says, "This also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat and who can have enjoyment?" Did you get that? Everything that you have, including the simple pleasures of life, have come to you from God. You didn't earn it. You didn't deserve it. It's a gift. So often we look at ourselves, we look at life, we look at whatever we have, whatever we enjoy. So often we pat ourselves on the back and we say, I earned this. I did it. I worked so hard for it. I deserve this because I did it. I earned it. And then what happens? We are devastated when that bubble pops. So often, so much of the time. I remember as a kid, like so many of you, I didn't make any money. I didn't make hardly any money at all. And it wasn't until I got a little bit older and I started to get my head on straight that I started to work towards making money. Because I was working in a factory, making about $6 an hour, had enough to support my car payments and Taco Bell habit, but that was about it. And I remember thinking, what would it take to go back to school, to find another job, to start making money, because I'd like to have some change in my pocket. And I remember being motivated at that time to go back to school, complete my 4-year degree in 2 years, work 3 or 4 web-related jobs, put together a portfolio, and then land a job. And I did. And that was back in the early 2000s. And my first job, I want to say, I made somewhere around $45,000 a year. With crazy good benefits, though. This is before 2008. And I remember thinking, this is awesome. I don't have to eat off the dollar menu anymore. This is incredible. I can afford to go camping. I can afford to do a few of the things that I really want to do because I have a little bit of change in my pocket and I can afford it now. And so I ended up getting just drunk on that. I just loved the idea of being able to do things that I couldn't do before. And within a couple of years, I had doubled my income. And then I just kept increasing it from there. And I know that many of you have similar stories. And I know that the danger for anyone, for all of us, is to look at whatever we have in life, whether it be much, whether it be little, and to say, I earned this. I worked hard for it. I am owed this. After all, it was my blood, sweat, and tears. It was my sleepless nights. It was all the effort that I put into it that brought me to this place. And all of these things are what? They are mine. Friends, we cannot afford to look at life that way. We cannot afford to look at things that way. We cannot even look at our achievements, our gains that way. Why? Because it is all a gift from God. We like to think that we are in control of so many things, but we don't have a lot of control, do we? I mean, yeah, sure, we can look back and we can say, oh, this wouldn't have happened if I hadn't done that, if I hadn't made this choice, if I hadn't exercised my will in this area. Well, you only have a will because God gave it to you. We have no control over our lives, over the next breath that we take, over our health, over so many things. Like, our lives are out of our control because it's all a gift that has been given to us by our Heavenly Father. You see, life is a gift. Labor is a gift. Love is a gift. A good steak is a gift from God. Yes, a glass of wine is a gift. Music is a gift from God. Children are a gift from God. Pets are a gift from God. Sports are a gift from God. Games are a gift from God. Friendships are gifts from God. I took my kids to the movies this weekend, and we thoroughly enjoyed ourselves from start to finish. Guess what? That was a gift from God. Every last moment of it. After it was over, we went to the mall. We walked around for a little while. We wandered into the Lego store. We purchased a little Lego kit for Benji and I to put together sometime in the near future. Guess what? That was a gift. It was a gift from God. The whole day was full of gifts. Listen, you don't need to speak in tongues or hold a revival or go on some spiritual journey to receive a spiritual experience. You don't. All you have to do is appreciate the gifts that God gives you. Solomon asked this question, who can eat or enjoy anything apart from God? It's a good question. Who can eat or enjoy anything apart from God? Because it all comes from God. You can't even eat, let alone enjoy the meal, if it wasn't for God allowing you to do so. He is the one who gave you the ability to eat. He is the one who made the gift enjoyable in the first place. And that is true for everything that you enjoy. Everything. So if you want to enjoy this havel of a life, Solomon would say, stop seeing the stuff of life as rewards earned and start seeing them as gifts to be enjoyed. Stop seeing life and the stuff of life as rewards that you have earned. Instead, see them as gifts to be enjoyed. If you don't, you will be crushed by disappointment. Look, that's why, in one sense, we have walked away sad this month after each message. From chapter 1, verse 3 to chapter 2, verse 23. I mean, part of it might be my preaching. I'll admit, I'm not the best preacher. I'm still learning. I'm still growing, and I have a long ways to go. But I think a lot of it has to do with the content of what we've been looking at. It has been bumming us out. Why? Because Kohelet has been looking for a reward. He told us in the 3rd verse of chapter 1, what is the reward? What is the profit? What is the gain to be had from all of this? He has been looking for the reward of life and labor, and he asks, what is the gain of all of our toil? And then he goes on this quest from wisdom to pleasure and personal achievement, only to see death wipe it all away, and he hates that. In fact, he's so disappointed, he hates life, and that is the natural place where we will all come to. But then he remembers that all of life's havels, the good, the bad, and the mixture, they are all gifts from God. And even though the bubble pops, he can enjoy it while he has it. So what's the solution? 3 parts. Learn to appreciate the simple things, the hard things, and the gifts God gives you. But it doesn't end there. Look at verse 26. He says, "For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy, but to the sinner he has given the business of gathering and collecting, only to give to one who pleases God. This also is Havel, and a striving after wind." Here's the gist of that verse. He's saying that Havel is for everyone, the saint and the sinner alike. Everyone experiences Havel. No one is exempt. However, not everyone is given the ability to recognize, understand, and enjoy the Havel for what it is. Not everyone is given that. Notice he says that God is the one who gives wisdom and knowledge and joy. And he doesn't give that to the sinner. He gives that to the one who pleases him. And hopefully we are okay with that, because we know that God does not give everybody the same things. I mean, I don't know about you, but I was not the top of my class in school. We don't all have the same things to work with. God is the one who has mercy on whom he has mercy and compassion on whom he has compassion. And who are you as a mere man to question God and who he gives to what and to where and to what he does? God is so above us, and he is God, and we have come to grips, hopefully, with that fact that we are not God. And he doesn't give everyone the same stuff, does he? To the sinner, he does not give the ability to recognize, understand, and enjoy the Havel of life for what it is. But to the believer, he has. To the Christian, if we were to move this along to this side of the cross, life goes on. We experience the same Havel we see here in this text, don't we? Things have not changed. It's rinse and repeat. We see the saint and the sinner alike. They all die. But the Christian has something the unbeliever doesn't. We have the ability to see and to understand the Havel for what it is, as a temporary gift from God. And unlike them, we have the ability to enjoy it. We can actually enjoy it. Whereas they go crazy as they try to make sense of all of this fleeting, upside-down, maddening life, we can enjoy the gift for what it is. But even then, what does Kohelet say at the end? He doesn't just tack this on because he said it so many times. He places it here for a reason. He says this also is Havel, and a striving after wind. Even when we recognize God's sovereign hand and his gracious provision in the gift, when all is said and done, Havel is still Havel. It is a short breath. It is here, and then it is gone. Now you might be thinking, that's great, Hans. But how? But how? How can I learn to appreciate the simple things, the hard things, and the gifts from God? Please don't tell me what to do without telling me how to do it. I need that. So how do we get there? Well, the answer is here in the text. It's in the journey, but I'll break it down into another triplet. Okay, here you go. You may want to write this down. I'm going to try to keep it brief. Number one, how do you do this? How do you come to a place where you appreciate the simple things, the hard things, and the gifts of God? First thing you got to do is embrace the Havel. Embrace the Havel. That means you don't spoil a good thing by holding on to it too tightly. Let your kids grow up. Don't work yourself to death. And when it comes to dieting, don't go crazy. Allow yourself to enjoy something that actually tastes good every once in a while. Why? Because it's Havel. It's a breath. All of it. It's all Havel. The good and the bad, it won't last forever. So come to grips with that reality and embrace it. You are a Christian. You're a believer. You're a child of God. Your Father wants to give good things to you. He has also given you the ability, something he hasn't given the unbeliever, the ability to recognize and understand these things. So hold on to them. Hold on to the Havel. That's number one. Number two, focus on God. Focus on God. Because he's in the Havel. Yes, there's a lot of sin in everything here in life because it's a fallen world, and sin has permeated everything, and everything is Havel, and everything dies. Yes, that's absolutely true. But don't fail to see the glory of God in it simply because it's been polluted. Aren't you glad that God didn't treat you that way when it came to the gospel? No, friends. God is so good, and he is in the Havel. Don't just assume his sovereignty, acknowledge it. Pause for a moment and recognize where the gift comes from. And thank him for the gift, as temporary as it might be. And then number 3, enjoy the ride. Enjoy the ride. You don't have to drive yourself crazy. You don't have to live with disappointment or dissatisfaction or despair. You can worship God in the good and the bad and the mixture, and you can discover joy in everything that he has to give you. I'll close with this. I had a Kohelet moment a couple of weeks ago. I was having a conversation with Emma, my oldest, and it was an ancient conversation, one that if you're a parent, I'm sure you've had it at one point in time with your kids. It was the question of bedtime. And she is in the 3rd grade, and a lot of her friends, some of them stay up late. I'm sure some of them go to bed early, but if you asked her, they all stay up later than she does. And I'm sure you've had that conversation with your kids before. I'm pretty sure my parents had that conversation with me. But Mom, but Dad, all my friends get to stay up at least a half hour later than I do. When am I going to be able to, right? We're having that conversation. We've all had that before. And then she asked me that question, Dad, at what point in time will I no longer have a bedtime? To which, of course, I can't help it. I start wax philosophical. I start telling her, well, kid, you're always going to have responsibilities. You'll probably always have a bedtime. You'll have to do this. You'll have to do that. You might have an irresponsible period in your 20s, but hopefully you'll outgrow that soon. And I'm kind of going into that whole thing, right? But at some point, people are going to expect something from you, and you're going to have to get up early, and you're going to want to be refreshed, and you're going to love sleep, and somewhere you're going to turn that corner, right? And then she's just sitting there, she's ingesting it all, and then I could tell she wasn't very satisfied with that answer. And so she said, okay, Dad, I get it, but when will I be able to pick my bedtime? To which I told her, I was like, I'm not sure. Mom and I haven't really talked about that yet. I'm sure it'll happen before you grow up, before you're out from under our house, most likely. But at the very least, in our society, in our culture, typically it's about 18 is whenever they say that you become an adult. Because at that point, you can vote, you can buy cigarettes, and they can draft you. And so most people would say probably about 18. That's whenever you get out and you go on your own. If you're adequately prepared for that, you might stay with us until you're 90, and that's okay. And so we're having that conversation as we're talking about things. And then it dawned on me. She turns 9 in just a couple weeks. And as I was thinking about it, didn't take long to do the math, I realized our time as parents, as those who are actually parenting this child, is about half over. It doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem right at all. I mean, I'd like to think that this beautiful baby girl that we brought home from the hospital yesterday is going to stay my kid for a lot longer than that. But we are going to have to start thinking about transitions and getting her ready to grow up, because it's going to be here before we know it. Why? Because it's Havel. Because it's fast. It's too fast. And I couldn't help but feel this pain in my chest afterwards as I talked about it even with Julia. And she lamented with me that it all goes by so fast, and I don't want that bubble to pop. But then I thought about these chapters, and I realized that I have a choice to make. I can ruin this Havel. I can ruin fatherhood. I can ruin what precious, brief amount of time I have with my kids. All I have to do is look at them as rewards gained and achievements earned and treasures to hold on to for as long as I can. If I do that, I will ruin the Havel. And if I really want to enjoy them, if I really want to enjoy my kids, I need to relish in the fact that they are the gift of God. As fleeting as it all might be, I need to thank God for the gift, and I need to learn to love every moment of this Havel. That's the message of chapters 1 and 2. Life is hard, it's short, it's full of Havel. You can't fix it, you can't figure it out, and you can't fill it in. So don't hold on to it for too long, and don't make more of it than you should, and don't see it as a game to be won. Rather, embrace the Havel. Focus on God and enjoy the ride. Because this life is God's gift to you. Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you for this gift. Thank you for all of the Havel of life, the good, the bad, and the mixture. Lord, you are a good God, and we are so thankful that we are not masters of our own fates, that we do not control our destinies, that ultimately everything that we have is a gift that has come to us from your hand, because you are so good, because you are our loving Father. Lord, I pray for each and every person in this room. I pray that we would make the most of our Havels, that we would learn to view life correctly, that we would adopt Kohelet's worldview, the worldview that you have presented to us in your holy word, that we would not see things as achievements gained, that we would not look at life and all the stuff that we have as rewards that have been earned, that we would see them for what they are, as gifts to be enjoyed, gifts that have come from you. Lord, thank you. Thank you again for this word. I pray that it would change our hearts and change our minds. In your name, amen.